So hello and welcome to this episode of the Kith Kin Hospitality Podcast, stories from the hospitality industry. And I'm really happy to welcome Mark here today to tell us his story of how he got to where he is in the hospitality industry, and of course, what makes the industry so special. So hi Mark, nice to meet you. Do you want to start by just giving an introduction to who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Cassie. Thanks for inviting me along. It's been very interesting. Just very briefly, I'll try and keep it brief. I hadn't heard your podcast before we met, and so I've been doing a little bit of listening. It's very interesting, and it's really exciting to be here. Yeah. So I'm J Mark Dodds. The J is my first name, which was never used by my parents, but it makes me easy to find because I've been a strong advocate for tight publicans who've been having troubles with their pubcos I've been doing this now for about 20 years. I got a very varied background, which in hospitality, I did a lot of hospitality in my later years, which began with me working in a pub in Northumberland in the late 70s, which was a Whitbread managed, I think it was a managed pub, and it was a rural, sounded a bit like your place in Leicestershire, actually.
Yeah, the gate hangs well, yeah.
Yeah, tiny village, huge catchment, very busy. And it was something I just really enjoyed doing. I think like many people, I got in hospitality because my first experiences of it were very positive. And those experiences were all about interaction and the stuff I didn't realize, actually, traditions, being involved with the heritage and stuff like that. And I studied art and photography and graphic design, and then got back into catering by working in a restaurant in Manchester to pay my way. And then inadvertently, this became a career. And I worked in London in a few restaurants in the West End, managed a nightclub in Mayfair for a couple of years, and then did landscaping for 6 years. And in that time, learned a lot about pubs by being a customer of pubs instead of with this sort of hospitality head on at the same time as being
absolutely.
A critical friend of lots of places. And I lived in southeast London, and then and happened across a rundown boozer, which was my then partner's, my girlfriend's local, and spent a bit of time actually planning a major garden design and build at Gardeners World Live in 1994 for a guy called I was hired by Jeff Hamilton and a guy called Dan Pearson, who's a quite well known garden designer now, to do the project management of that and put that together. And I was using the back garden of this pub, which is south facing, in May 1994, thinking I've got a lot of work to do for this exhibition. And at the back of my mind, thinking, why is this pub quiet and what's going on with it? It's got a south facing garden and it's big, it's empty, and it should be really busy and it should be amazing. So I ended up finding out it was going on the market and signed a tied lease on that pub, and then began to learn about the tied pub sector. And I applied all my
So up to this point, it all sounds idyllic and absolutely fine. But I think I know a little bit about this story, so
yeah,
it doesn't remain like that.
I mean, really, my story's like countless thousands of other people who have become publicans and signed tied leases and not really understood what they were getting themselves into, which sounds like, I'm admitting I was naive. I was naive in as much as I didn't know what a tied lease was, but I knew I could make a business very busy by being good at it. Interior, feel, atmosphere, greeting, systems, apply. I think some of the stuff I've heard you say and some of your other guests has been very much like this. It's about making a place, an environment, really, really enjoyable place to be, and then making sure your products match that, knowing your audience and then listening to your audience and so on. And it's an infinite feedback loop of really interesting stuff, basically. And it all boils down to catering, hospitality, serving people, and looking after people, making people happy, basically. And I got a lot of that very right. It was nominated. It opened in December '95. It was nominated for Time Out Bar of the Year, May '96. Nominated for Evening Standard Pub of the Year '98, and there were other kind of awards. usual kind of, it sounds flippant, the usual kind of stuff for very good pubs, really, that comes along. And I was there for 16 years and spent a good part of that time, in retrospect, really feeling like I was fighting my freeholder to have the right to run my business the way I wanted to run it. And it's a long story. And along the way, I talked to other licensees about. It is a long story, but it's difficult to summarize.
It's difficult to summarize.
After my first rent review, which I lost, I owed something like £22,000 back rent the moment the rent review was settled, and that was the point at which the pub company was threatening to take me to go to arbitration, and all the recommendations were don't go to arbitration. It's a roller coaster ride. You could come out a lot worse. There's no guarantee the arbitrator is going to see on your side. So I agreed and ended up owing £22,000, which I didn't have in the bank cash flow wise, and experienced a whole load of extreme pressure applied to me by it was Scottish and Newcastle at that time to get this money back in a lump sum. And for my second rent review, that was leading up to 2000. The rent review was 2000. For a second rent review, the impact of that rent review meant I had to change the way I did business. I used to do table service. We used to do table service in the restaurant area. We had a big garden, big restaurant area, big no smoking area, big, huge front of house area for bar, drinks, snacks, stuff like that. And I had to lay 3 people off to be able to pay this back debt. Anyway, I can be guilty about that. Anyway, second rent review, I was ready for it. I kind of knew what was going to happen. I knew it was going to be tough, and I started making very strong inroads into, meeting other licensees in southeast London where my pub was. My pub was called the Sun and Doves. It was in Camberwell. Still there. It's not called the Sun and Doves anymore. It's called the Sun now. Started meeting other tied licensees and asking them what they felt about their relationship with their pub company. And between us, we discovered that we all experienced the same kind of things, no matter who our pub company was. And in some instances, a different pub company had the same area manager, a different publican in a different pub company had an area manager who was who had been an area manager for somebody else in a different pub company not long before, but they just swapped sides and changed badges and said the same thing, basically. Out of doing that networking, that gave me a very strong case for my next rent review, and it led to a campaign called the Fair Pint Campaign. I'm setting up, which I was the founder, in that I started asking other people these questions and saying, I think we're all being screwed. And the Fair Pint Campaign, this was all in southeast London, a very short distance from Westminster, so you could get on a bus and be in Westminster in half an hour. If that had not been the case, Fair Pint Campaign couldn't have happened. And as it was, it was made up of a bunch of licensees who all had they were all multiple award-winning publicans, basically, who were all feeling like their businesses were right on the edge because the extraction of their rent and tight beer prices made their businesses precarious, even then we all felt that our businesses were very solid, but our underlying financial reality was quite fragile. And through a series of meetings, investigations, and research, met a couple of MPs and lords and so on who were interested in supporting the campaign. And the campaign launched in, I think it was May 2008 at Westminster and we had a political lobbying company supporting us, basically, called Connect Public Affairs. And Fair Pint launched in 2008 saying we were lobbying the government to end the beer tie. And through a whole series of interventions and learning experiences, we were told that I'll start again. It launched in May 2008. We were on the front page of the Morning Advertiser and the Publican, which was still around then. And I personally experienced a huge shock at that moment because my name was on the front page of these trade papers. And I suddenly found myself, because I felt like I'm going to be identified by the pub committee and they're going to have me. And a couple of other people, a guy called Steve Corbett, who was with Enterprise at the time, he felt the same. He was mentioned too. Anyway, that was the first revelation of how fearful I felt of my relationship with my pub committee. And then the initial flurry of activity about that, basically all the pub companies pushed back, Ted Tubman particularly, because he's very vocal. He was the chief executive of Enterprise Inn, saying we're not representative of the rest of the industry.
Right, yeah.
If we spent more time running our businesses instead of blogging, we might be more successful and stuff like this. When we were already working 60, 70 hours a week, and we did all of our campaigning time in the hours outside of that. And so, it was a very interesting period. And the conclusion of the Fair Pint campaign was that we learned, we were told that what you've done is made a big intervention in the pub sector. This is from all angles around the official sort of edifice of the status quo at Westminster, which includes the British Beer and Pub Association, BII, and Campaign for a whole bunch of other organisations, Federation of Small Businesses, many others. And we were told broadly that if we continued with our tack of trying to end the beer tie altogether, we wouldn't be taken seriously. We were regarded as revolutionaries and disruptors and all this kind of stuff. So then we spent roughly 8 years trying to figure out how to, I'm exaggerating slightly, it might be 6 years, trying to work out how to formulate a campaign that does not include all tied premises. And then the pubs, and this led to a thing called the Pubs Code coming into place in 2016, which supposedly regulates the main pub companies against in their behaviour towards their tenants. It's very easy to research this stuff. It's called the Pubs Code. And what happened to me along that time is my continuing to be very busy, multiple award-winning pub. Finally, I lost a rent review, second rent review, lost it. It went through arbitration, went to High Court, went to appeal, went to High Court, went back to arbitration, and I ended up running out of money, running out of road, and losing the rent review. And the arbitrator finding against me, leaving me with a bill of £150,000 back rent, including costs. In 2018. No, where are we now? I've lost track. Totally lost track. Yeah, 20. It's appalling. I've totally lost track. The Fair Pint campaign launched 2008. My rent review came to a conclusion in 2008, but it took 3 years to resolve, inasmuch I had this huge historic debt. And I was paying the uplifted rent. And then I presume the pub company, which was by then Heineken, did it more from Scottish Newcastle to Heineken. They had trouble figuring out what to do with this relatively high-profile person. And eventually I was evicted on a, just owing rent, basically. That's what it came down to. In 2011, I was homeless for 3 years. That experience was pretty tough for me and my family. I split up with my partner, mother of our children, and this has happened to thousands and thousands of tenants, something like this. Mine was a little bit more amplified. The debt was a bit bigger, took a bit longer to resolve. The damage to the relationship was not untypical. The feelings of failure, losing a business which was really busy yet failing. Really weird contrast to put up with.
Absolutely.
And I resolved that I wouldn't get a job exactly. I think I was 52 at the time, something like that, because there was a lot of volunteering left to be done for the Pubs Code for the work. So I worked out of the office of an MP called Greg Mulholland in Portcullis House for about a year and a half. Basically, I was called the administrator of the British Pub Confederation, but what I was doing, was my title, but it was volunteering. And what I was doing was mobilising tied tenants into sending emails, writing to their MPs, trying to inform MPs about what was really going on in the relationship between their tenants, their constituents, their tenants and their pub companies. That was my job for ages. And then I got this is getting there, 2014, I was offered a flat in a cooperative housing association because by then I was a vulnerable adult, single male vulnerable adult, and that kind of saved my life. And in the interim period, I was staying with friends, and at that time, both my parents were alive, and they were lending me £500 a month, so I didn't have to get a job, didn't have to sign on at that time, and that provided some stability. And then in 2016, 2017, it does get convoluted. I moved to Berwick temporarily to reopen a pub in Berwick called the Brown Bear Inn, which did happen, but that was to be a social enterprise. And in 2018, my mum got diagnosed. My parents lived in Northumberland, so this whole thing planned in.
Yeah.
And the reopening of this pub, which was Enterprise Inn's most northerly pub, had closed, and it was up for auction. And I couldn't raise the finance to buy the freehold in time, but I negotiated a deal with the guy who did buy it to resurrect it as a proper pub in the middle of Berwick. And all I can, as a social enterprise, it was to be the proof of principle for a pub company I've been working on for the foundations of for a very long time, called the People's Pub Partnership. To prove the principles of this pub company, I've been proposing, and my mum got diagnosed with terminal lung cancer in late 2017, and I had to bail out of the pub, and then I became my parents' full-time carer at that point. And she died in 2018. My dad died in 2022. I had to leave the pub in 2018. It's still trading, but it's not a social enterprise. Since my dad died in 2022, so I learned how to be full-time carer, which was a very interesting experience. And if I'd not been a failure, if I'd not failed as a publican, if I'd not had this catastrophic reality learning about the Tide pub sector, I wouldn't have been able to do that, because I've seen lots of friends in my peer group have their parents get very ill and have to travel every weekend for years. It's been torture for everybody. It's been really difficult to do. And I entered COVID. I was just listening to some of your previous work with people talking about COVID, and I went in there for the first time in my life, being really relieved that I wasn't involved in running a pub.
Yeah.
And wondering what I would have done, because I pretty much knew what I would have done if it had been me. But what a nightmare for anyone to go through,
absolutely.
and all the stuff you said. It's a shocking experience. And bizarrely, I find myself in a very... one of your previous guests said that he had a mate who was a roofer during COVID, and he had a fantastic time because he was so busy. So I was a carer for my dad by then, and we used to walk around the village every day, kind of in the middle of nowhere. And it's a small village. It's not in the middle of nowhere, literally, but it's the nearest town's like 25 kilometers away, and so on. And suddenly COVID happened, and the world became my world. And my dad's, we had this amazing time, because it's like everybody became locked down at the same time, and we just carried on as normal. We had a kind of bizarre freedom that came out of that sort of psychological thing, but not hearing traffic on the main A1, just these really rich experiences, and somehow not feeling the need to have to be anxiously concerned about things all the time, because it was this imposed pond of stillness. It was a kind of interesting experience, and I began again working in a more focused way on assembling the foundations of this pub company I touched on as well. And a bunch of stuff's happened since then. And I've spent the 2 years since my dad died recovering from that emotional experience and reassessing my entire life, having flashbacks. I've not been diagnosed, but I have ADHD. I have no doubt about this now. And there's a diagnosis going on, but it'll take a long time.
Yeah.
And having a huge learning about all of my previous experiences, which lead me to be here now in a cooperative housing association flat in South East London, talking to you, still working on the idea of pub company to solve the problems of the pub sector, and a whole bunch of stuff in between. And that's it. You let me go on very well there.
No, it's fascinating. But I just wanted to go back a bit just to the pub code, because obviously it came in 2016 around there. But what actually changed? What was the big difference that the pub code brought in?
Well, you see, that's a really interesting question. And in principle, it was supposed to make the relationship. It was supposed to rebalance the power of the relationship between pubcos and their tenants, so that Thai tenants would be no worse off than tenants who were free of Thai and in the free of Thai sector. And I think it's called the spirit, and the wording of the code had that intent. But in practice, it's quite a big thing to impose. And the pub companies had spent so long. It's called consultation. When law happens, we spent 8 years or so with ministers occasionally saying we're mindful of unintended consequences of law change, and the beer orders of 1989 caused a lot of problems, created the problem we've got now. We don't want to make it worse by adding to that. And our argument, this is basically publicans, licensees' argument was, well, if you get rid of the beer tie, and there are no regulations about that, then the pub companies and the brewers have got to be more transparent about what they're doing, because they've got to be competing against each other. Anyway, so the pubs code was supposed to improve that relationship and make it fairer, but the pub companies had loads of experience of the kind of things that were discussed that would come into legislation to regulate them. So by the time the regulations did come in, they were issuing different types of lease. They weren't doing long-term leases. So they had a legacy of people with long-term leases that the pubs code applied to. And as they come to the ends of their leases and their cyclical rent reviews and the cyclical lease endings, lots of pub companies decided, I think this is quite widely reported, decided to, I think they're called Section 25, right to take back a property for their own use. So lots of tenants who had signed a tied lease, for example, with Enterprise at the time when Enterprise had no managed pubs whatsoever, reasonably expected when it came to the end of their lease, they would be in the same situation they were in at the original signing, and they'd be able to renegotiate their lease on the same terms, but looking at market conditions at the end of the lease period, by which time Enterprise and I think Punch and others have come up with managed divisions, so they're able to say, we're going to take back the pub to use for our own use.
Gotcha.
So I think the sum of it overall, I've got a very good friend who's called Chris Wright. He's the founder of the Pubs Advisory Service. We became friends through a professional relationship, through the Fair Pint Campaign and the lobbying. And he's still very actively involved in supporting Thai tenants now. And he's got a very big overview of the whole sector from a legal and, a practical point of view standpoint. And he says the main difference is that people don't get bankrupted as much now. They don't lose everything. They get out with some kind of shirt on their back, whereas before it would lead often to the kind of consequences I experienced where I lost everything. And I regard this as not a very good thing, to be honest.
No.
I regard it as it's better than it was, but it's still pretty bad. If you look at the landscape and the general feeling and news about what's going on with pubs now, it's horrific. And it is, of course, it's all post-COVID, it's post, should I say pandemic, it's post-pandemic, it's post-energy gouging, it's post-Brexit, all these things which we never really have a fully mature conversation about in Britain. But ultimately, Thai tenants are still suffering higher than average rents in across the sector, and their beer supply prices are much higher than free of Thai beer supply prices, and so on and so forth. And pubs are closing everywhere. And when COVID ended, I think many of us anticipated this anyway, but it was utterly clear to me that when COVID ended and the government legislation, the government legislation to prevent evictions and so on failure of rent payments and stuff like this, when that came through, I just anticipated there'd be a huge range of evictions going on, and they don't get reported widely in the press. And I think Wellington Inns have done a huge amount of evictions, the Reuben brothers through Criterion Asset Management. And this stuff goes on around the country, but it's not part of the national story. Just pub closures become part of the national story, and we read again and again in local press. If you've got a feed saying, an RSS feed that says community pub closing, failing, you just get this stuff all the time from all over the country. Another individual pub when you see it in the local news, it's a dead ringer for being a brilliant pub, but it's run down, it's knackered, and so on and so forth. And it's been carrying all these burdens of the past. They're generally, not exclusively, but most of them, by far the most of them, were previously tied pubs that didn't get invested in because the tenants never earned enough profit to be able to keep investing in the business. We're really at the, I don't know, is nexus the right word? We're really the pinnacle, the nadir. We're at the top, the bottom, everything of the pubs crisis, which has just been running for, the pubs crisis has been around since I started being old enough to drink, basically.
Yeah, and I think what you're describing is exactly, some of the conversations, as you say, we've had on the podcast previously, that certainly post-COVID, lots of things happened all at once, and it was the industry was heading in a particular direction, but it just sped up, and it just became very obvious and sort of right in your face and stark. And also this idea that now we are post-COVID. I mean, we may be, but actually the reality for hospitality across the board, not just pubs, but the reality for hospitality is that in some respects it's harder now than it was, a few years ago, when at least there was some understanding of what was going on. And now it's just sort of everyone for themselves trying to get through it. And I think that, as you're right, nobody's really, I well, obviously I'm in the industry, so I hear it all the time. Occasionally somebody will say, oh, however many pubs are closing every single month, and that becomes something that everyone starts talking about. But nobody's actually really understanding or looking at those individual pubs and actually what's going on in that situation. And I go back to actually something else that you said earlier, which was this sort of this culture that you feel, and not just from the pub coast, but from everybody, that actually that somehow it's the publicans. It will inevitably be the publicans' fault that if they had done it better, or they had worked harder, or they had known more, or they had whatever, they could have. And everyone does it, don't they? They say, look at that lovely pub. Wouldn't it be great? Well, it's just obviously got a rubbish tenant, a rubbish publican. Who, if only I could get my hands on that pub, I could turn it into something amazing.
Exactly.
Whereas the reality is not like that, because there's just, in a lot of cases, just too much pressure on that business for anyone to make it work. And then you're sort of masking that with this problem. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Well, sorry, right. The pub sector is so complex and nuanced, and it's got so many different facets to it. It's not possible to come up with generalizations that apply right across the sector. And you said something. Actually, it was called the Zonal Podcast on BII about 2 years ago. You were interviewed on that, and I think you said then that did I get this right? You reopened the pub after COVID, and it was your first time at that pub. So you understand a lot. You understand a lot of this, and you said something then about you understand a lot of this, and it was a very interesting time to start a new business in hospitality in a pub in a village in the middle of nowhere, that kind of thing. Now my belief, and quite a few people have challenged me on this and say they think I'm naive and I don't really know what I'm talking about. My belief is a purpose-built pub is wherever it is because there was a reason for it to be there originally.
Yeah.
Unless there's been a dramatic change to I mean a really serious dramatic change to the population around it. And I don't mean loads of Muslims living. I'm being serious here as well. Pubs are about people first and foremost. And if they provide a wide enough range of services as a public house, they don't even need to provide alcohol. It's the main ingredient, right?
I totally agree. Yeah.
But if a pub's in the middle of a trading estate and that has failed and has gone completely empty and it's landlocked, that's the kind of place a pub will never work again. And there are undoubtedly the odd spots of pubs which will never work again. But by and large, if a pub was busy in the past, it can be made busy again if it's invested in properly, run professionally, and it's stocked and staffed by the right kind of things and people that have got the right presentation and ethos. Now, I think that is a generalisation which does apply right across the geographical pub sector, but there is no large-scale pub company entity, large-scale thing in the pub sector that will do that at scale, whereas there are odd individuals around who will find a pub in those circumstances and turn it into a multiple award-winning pub because they kind of understand what they're doing and why they're doing it. They know the area and all the rest of it. But the key thing, in my view, is that, well, this stands the test of examination. If you don't invest in the premises, if you don't have the resources to be able to invest in the premises and training and getting people up to speed and have a big enough understanding of what attracts people, the whole thing, because it is a very complex, nuanced thing, getting an atmosphere right, then it's very hard to do. And given that we live in a culture where lots of people think, I'd love to run a pub, and you were touching on it just then, it can't be that difficult. The previous tenants didn't know what they were doing. And pub companies actively say this to new tenants, prospective tenants who don't have any experience. And then the tenants, they've got, it's called confirmation bias, because they've shown an interest in this pub for a reason. They know the area, whatever. And they love the idea of it. And they think, by and large, they're getting into business with a big, experienced, important pub company that's got loads of heft behind it and loads of advice and support. And generally, I mean, I admit my live experience is a bit rusty now because I'm not involved in that all the time, but I'm still involved with big networks of tied tenants. And the same stuff that was going on when I was a tenant and leading up to the pubs code is still going on. Pub companies are these entities, they're machines. It's not about people, it's about machinery that extracts rent, that applies ludicrously profiteering prices to the beer supply just because they can. And the tenants don't get the support that they believe they will get, and then they're left high and dry. And those pubs continue to churn and fail because they're not invested in enough and so on. Don't know whether that made any sense, but
no, absolutely. It is. Yeah. So what is the ambition for the People's Pub Partnership then?
Well, the ambition, right, I've been working on this for 15 years and I just hesitated, right? It's not a good sign, is it? No, the ambition is to have a pub company that does all the right things and has the right kind of capital and wherewithal and professional experience to be able to put right the wrongs that the pub sector's accumulated over the last 40 years or so, since the pubs code particularly. Professionals in place to be able to retrofit pubs to the highest standards feasible for contemporary need, so they're fit for 21st century purpose. And that includes, because these are all run-down, knackered buildings that are probably running on services that are 30 years past their proper sell-by date that should have been replaced a long time ago. So they're grotesquely inefficient, terribly badly insulated, which is added to the burden of the individual publicans surviving business anyway. So retrofit the pubs to operate fossil fuel free, look at the entire supply chain when you're reopening from beginning, concentrate on local and regional produce. I believe absolutely there is a case to be made for not using global brands on the bar. Well, that's very contentious generally because we know premium brands are very important. But there's not a premium brand on the planet that isn't matched or done better by a local brewer somewhere, right?
That was the ethos of my first ever place. We did exactly that. We matched everything with something better, and all of we were really young when we did it. But you'd have our customers come in and say, "Oh, even things like have a Malibu and Coke. No, we don't stock that, but we have this. It's so much better." And they go. And then, I mean, we started off with all the global brand beers, but I did gradually get them off as well. And this is the joy of having a freehold, that you can do what you like. And but I remember we took Stella off, and I had a whole bunch of customers said, "Right, that's it, we're going. We're never coming back again." I said, "Okay, fine." I mean, I think it took them about 4 days before they came back and said, "Yeah, it's better here than everywhere else anyway."
It's lovely.
We'll try your other stuff, which is better.
I absolutely, absolutely love.
Yeah.
No, that's fantastic. I'm really pleased, and because I've got mates who they happen all to be men, right? These mates who have tried all, and I've done it before. We did this in Berwick, and And the odd, it's typically men, right? It's not so much women. A guy comes in with a bunch of other mates, and four of them are interested in the beers, the proper local cask conditioned beers, what even the keg craft. And then Johnny or whatever, or Barry's not interested in the he wants Kronenberg or Stella, and they'll all leave. They will all leave because he won't get what he wants.
Because it's not on. Yeah.
But what I did see up there was the guys that didn't get their first pint in because Barry or John was there. They come back very often with their partner, their girlfriend or wife or boyfriend even. And then Barry or John comes in 3 weeks later, with their partner looking all smart and like, right, we're really looking forward to this.
No, absolutely. Yeah, so I used to own places like that. They were my places.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And the sum of it is, this then goes back into what pubs are about and what pubs are really up for. And I said this already. I mean, I know you get it because that's why you're in the business, I think. And from what I've listened to, is that pubs are about people and community and good fellowship. I'm going to get really really emotional talking about what pubs are really about.
I do as well.
No, that's good. I haven't got it with me. There's a pub. There's a fantastic book by a guy called Mark Halewood, which is called. This is where I forget what it's called. It's a historical. It's a book about the pub, and it's called Alehouses and Early. I'm going to cry. It's called Alehouses and Good Fellowship in Early Modern England, and it is just brilliant, right? It's because it's about how the pub arrived out of the seething stuff that was going on in the 1500s, and how legislation came to be applied to a non-legislated thing, which was alehouses, generally often very near churches or church grounds, monasteries, and so on like this. And then how, I learned something through reading that book and through talking to Mark as well about this, which is that I've always been confused about why are the English and the British so confused about their relationship with the pub. Why do we love the pub so much, but why are so many pubs closing? What is going on? There's something wrong. If we've got a market, why isn't the market supplying demand? And the story is that we've changed our habits because of the 21st century. All those things we've heard, those lazy solutions absolutely. Like cheap supermarket burgers, all this kind of stuff, home entertainment. I mean, for a while, the Wii thing, the Wii Fit, that for a while that was considered a threat to pubs. But no, and pubs are run down. When pubs are run down, stinking places that are pretty depressing to go to, and they're all selling global lagers that people don't really want. Why do people go to the pub? That's the real reason. And swinging back on all of that, I've lost myself now. Swinging back on all of that, I've just lost the thread entirely. Sorry.
No, it was about the joy. You were talking about the joy of the pub and sort of the the good fellowship and all of that.
Thank you. That is what it's all about. And we are hypersocial creatures, and we want to meet each other.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason pubs fail is because they're run down shitholes, not because people don't want to go to pubs. People want to go to places where they can enjoy themselves and have a great time, but they don't want to think. So the emotional attachment we have to the pub culturally, and people abroad understand this more acutely than we do, because they see the pub as a vital cultural institution, which we do as well, but we think they're so much part of our DNA, our cultural DNA, they'll always be there. And we're busy.
Take it for granted, don't we?
That's right, without meaning to. And then we always lament the loss of a pub when it does happen. None of us is highly enough informed. I mean, I'm quite well informed, and I spend a lot of time trying to be informed. I'm nowhere near as well informed as you need to be to understand all this stuff accurately. Stuff is going on in the pub sector, which is basically about profit out of bricks and mortar. It's got nothing to do with hospitality or anything else. So when you resurrect a pub with the kind of the heft and experience and capital behind you that a pub company could apply to restoring a pub and engage the local community in doing that, you can have a vitally important thing, which is our pub culture, restored to its rightful place at the heart of community all over Britain, but it needs an entity that's able to replicate the kind of things that individuals do when they're really saving a pub. Some pub companies can do in terms of their supply chain and the power of being able to negotiate on freeholds well, and there's a whole bunch of stuff which is impossible for the pub sector to. There's a gap in the pub sector, and that is a benevolent, socially minded, for profit, but for the right reasons, pub company, and that's what this is all about. So I used to describe it as the People's Pub Partnership would be a crowd-funded, cooperative model social enterprise, multi-stakeholder cooperative model social enterprise. So that no such legal entity exists. So the proposition is to establish a legal trading form. You might describe it as kind of like a bit like B Corp company.
Yeah.
But in the DNA of the business itself, that acknowledges all stakeholders in the pub. You've got staff, like John Lewis and the Co-op combined, plus investors can be part owners, customers can be part owners, volunteers, all pubs have volunteers around them, and then the planet and the place. So we want to reinvest in the local area as well as in business practices that don't denude the planet.
Absolutely fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I'm in. I'm totally in. I totally agree with you. I think it'd be absolutely wonderful if that happens. And any help you need, I'm right there with you.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much. Thank you.
So just so we can finish up, can you just let people know how they can get in touch with you?
LinkedIn, J Mark Dodds, is the easiest way probably. There is a website, but it's a white page at the moment. That's awaiting another volunteer to help get it together, which is peoplespubpartnership.co.uk. And my J Mark Dodds is on all social media. I'm very easy to find like that.
Perfect.
And where it's up to is we've got a draft. There are a bunch of other people who are working on a podcast called Awful at the Pubs to bring this conversation specifically about the value of the pub. And a book is being formulated, and we've got a kind of ghostwriter who lives in Berlin who's working on that, and a conference last year called The Future of Pubs, which was held at Lincoln University, which was organised by a woman called Victoria Ellis-Voles. That's turned into a document which kind of lays out the proposition for this People's Pub Partnership with another entity called the Ministry of Pubs, which would be a charity. So it's all progressing like that. And J Mark Dodds, that's it.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to go off and search all that and find out more, and definitely try to get involved if I can. Thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thank you, Cassie.
And getting to know your story, and obviously your passion for the industry and pubs in particular is amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Well, it's been a real pleasure meeting you as well. I found out a lot listening to your podcasts, actually. Yeah.
Oh, brilliant.
No, I'm not. Genuinely, it's been really nice because I missed out. I felt as though I've really missed out not knowing about you. So thank you.
We know each other now. Fantastic.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Right. Cheers now. Okay.